So welcome, and the title of the talk could have been Capitalism or Commonwealth, or how we can rescue capital for productive use. I saw the bouncy castle, and it said bouncing on Thatcher's grave on it. So Margaret Thatcher has left quite a legacy in which a lot of commonwealth, like the capital from our from our public industries, energy companies, railways, council houses, have been privatised. And so how do we rebuild commonwealth is the question. And I was brought up in the Yorkshire Dales as a hill farmer, and I still don't know who owned the fell. We as farmers had the right to graze sheep on the fell. We had common rights to graze 200 sheep. That was a form of commonwealth. And the other lesson I learnt was cooperation. Do you all like Wensleydale cheese? Yeah, when the local railways stopped going to Hawes, the farmers created Wensleydale Creamery for Wensleydale cheese, and that was a cooperative. Okay, so cooperative forms and commonwealth. And the problem is that capital, land, language, culture, genetic inheritance have been made into commodities, and they've been turned into markets. And the markets have been enclosed, and we're charged to access. And we see how our energy prices, our transport prices, our housing prices have gone up as a result. So when my wife Judy and I started out in Bristol with a young family in 1974 with 2 children, our housing costs were about 15% of our income. Now young couples can spend 40-50% of their income on rent. Yeah, so that's an example of how wealth has shifted. So the question is, what's the alternative? And what I've been trying to do is to create cooperative commonwealth bodies for owning capital and assets, because capital is too important to be left to big corporations who are not interested necessarily in our communities. So, if you like, one example because we've had a permaculture talk, is the local food movement. So in Stroud Commonwealth in 2003, we had a question: how can community-supported agriculture projects, sorry about this, get land, secure land for the future, particularly organic ones or permacultural ones. So we set up a national project, and our first project was Ford Hall Farm in Shropshire. Ben was 19 and Charlotte was 21. They were third-generation organic tenants, and the estate wanted to sell the farm from underneath them. So we worked with them and the community, and we set up, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called a Community Benefit Society. It was called an Industrial and Providence Society, and it's a cooperative model, because Charlotte, at the age of 21, said, "Martin, we need a structure for participation and involvement and investment." So we set up with Cooperatives UK Ford Hall Community Land Initiative, and we raised £850,000 in 9 months in the form of withdrawable shares. So it's a democratic form of trusteeship, and people could invest £50. I remember there was a group from the local school of primary school children. They raised £50 from a jumble sale, so they had 1 share. And so they bought the farm. We bought the farm, one farm, 8,500 trustees in 2006 it was. and it's been developing ever since. Has anybody been there? You've been. What did you find there? It's Patricia, isn't it? What was happening at Ford Hall?
Well, there wasn't a lot happening the day I went, I'll be honest.
Can you hear?
I just popped by. They've got they had a little shop where they're selling their own produce direct to the public. And Ben, the farmer, the son, he took me around and showed me how they farmed and how his father had. Do you want me to tell this part or not?
Yeah, it's fine.
He had this unique way of farming. He had developed all these different grasses and put them on different fields so that you never had to rely on outside feed. They didn't have to make feed for the animals in the winter. The land was such that they were able to graze all year round. So they had a closed system where they weren't reliant on anything from outside. And the animals also were healthy because they were outside all year. And what struck me about the place was that, well, Charlotte and Ben, very young people, they came across as really ordinary, but they were extraordinary in their vision, and just looking for opportunities to involve people from outside. And they had volunteer weekends where armies of people would come and they would camp in the barns, and so all their vision, it was all matter of fact, all their visionary stuff, they just got done. They planned how to do it, and well, I think a point in case that they actually were able to save their farm says it all, really.
Yes, and they got huge support. So that model of a community benefit society, the question is, how can we enable individual initiative, like you want to start up a food business or a building business, but how can we also hold capital and land and community assets for long-term community benefits? And for example, allotments, public parks. I mean, Bristol City owns, I think, 50% of your land in Bristol, doesn't it? That's in statutory ownership. But there's lots and lots of community assets and also capital forms that we can use to develop new forms of business. And another example I've given you here is after Ford Hall Farm, Cooperatives UK woke up to the fact that there was this wonderful model communities could use to build community assets. So communities could use to invest in themselves. And Ford Hall Farm, there was only one community buyout in 2005-06. And last year there were several hundred new community benefit societies established. There were 200 or 300 in the renewable energy area. And a group of us have set up something called the Biodynamic Land Trust, which is a kind of organic farming based on working with the cycle of the year, with the enhancing fertility, using all sorts of preparations. It's similar to organic farming. And we set up a community benefit society, which is actually charitable, to secure farmland for particularly young farmers. But we also want, because buying land is actually quite expensive. It costs 8,000, 10,000, 7,000, 11,000 an acre. Because lots of people think they can perhaps build houses on it, or they want to do all sorts of other things other than just farm. It's quite expensive. So we thought we would like to develop a companion body, which we called Ecodynamic, to invest in renewable energy. So we've raised about 250,000 in shares and loans so far, nearly 300,000 actually, and we're buying a wind turbine in Cornwall, and we'll buy other renewable energy projects as well, develop other ones. And the profits from that will pay shares at 3% and then 5%. So if you invest £100 or £500, you'll get a fair rate of return. But the profits from this, we're going to reinvest in other renewable energy projects and in land and food. So there's there's a lot of these now developing around the country. Now, that's one form of doing it. But in terms of stewarding capital as a commons, there's also the co-op movement. Who's a member of a co-op here? Yeah? There's the co-op movement. There's also, there are some companies. Did you know that Andrews Estate Agents gives all its profits to Oxfam? Did you know that?
No.
They look like an average business, don't they? Average estate agent's business. But the founder of Andrews dedicates all the profits to Oxfam. So there's actually quite a few businesses. It's not just John Lewis. You probably know the story of John Lewis, don't you, in Waitrose? John Lewis was a Methodist, I think. And before the First World War, he realised he got more money personally every year than all his staff put together. So he set up a partnership, the John Lewis Partnership, and so he put the capital into the partnership body, which can never be privatised and it can never be sold on the stock exchange. Because as soon as you put your business onto the stock exchange, like Anita Roddick of the Body Shop discovered, your shares are sold on the stock exchange and you no longer have control over your company. So she went from a nice family business to a quoted company on the stock exchange, and eventually she sold to, who did she sell to? Was it L'Oreal? Which was part of the enemy for her, because they spread an ideal of beauty that she didn't agree with. Yeah? But that's because of that structure. So the John Lewis Partnership, he put it into trust for the benefit of the partners, the staff, and suppliers, and it's a great business. So that's another form of the mutualisation or the neutralisation of capital in a productive use. I have to say, however, that family businesses, small businesses, owner-owned businesses, where there's a personal connection with the capital of a business, that's a very healthy form of using capital productively. When there's that personal connection. The problem arises often when a family business or a pioneer sells their business, often to a corporation, and then they actually don't understand that business, and it can no longer serve the community and staff and customers, and that key personal relationship is lost. So it's not that I'm against the personal ownership of capital, it's just that when it gets into corporate forms and publicly quoted forms, it may be divorced from real social uses. So any questions or any thoughts about how we can, how we need capital. We need capital to invest in houses, in businesses, in productive uses. But what thoughts have you got for how to do this? I've put forward a few suggestions. And do you have questions about it too? What have you seen work?
I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
A lot of people here would probably like to see an end to capitalism. How do you see these models? Do you see them as a way of reappropriating power back into communities away from capitalism, and then, or do you see it as a coexisting? I mean, do you see it as a force for massive social change, or because there has to be some form of exchange?
Yeah.
But what if you don't have the capital initially to do? If you're not in a situation to engage or to be able to buy your food or land.
Well, what happened in the early 19th century was that laissez-faire, capitalism, if you like, was demolishing society. And so 12 people, the Rochdale pioneers in the 1840s, said, how can we start where we are in our community? So they created the cooperative. and the idea was to run a good retail grocery outfit and to reinvest the profits in building up the cooperative movement. So by the 1890s, the cooperative retail societies was the biggest organisation or company in Britain. So I think what I'm suggesting is that one way, and I think there's lots of different ways, because I think there's lots of creative business people who have a role too, is to build up cooperative solutions. For example, in housing, we're trying to develop co-op housing solutions as well. And I think even if it's a small amount, people can invest in their community. What ideas do you have?
Well, I think that, like in your book, you talk about things like a basic income.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting idea, of everyone having a basic income, because it gives everybody a stake then. You're not going to starve for work.
Right.
And you can meet your needs, and then you can build on top of that. The problem is that at the moment is that we're seeing less and less people with any resource, and a concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. So I suppose it's how do you move to a situation where people can be more engaged? Because we do have to provide stuff for ourselves. There's no doubt about that. We still got to provide housing and all these sorts of things. Very often, I feel a lot of this stuff is talked about in a quite an abstract way, in more theoretical. If you look at anarchist models, it's like, well, we could do this, but actually we've got to get from where we are now to a different place, and that's where I think it's very difficult to imagine how do you transition from what we've got now to a situation where actually people's needs are met and life is better. Do we have full-scale revolution, or is it a piecemeal approach? Because capitalism seems to be failing quite massively at the moment in terms of the economic crisis. I've got to dominate it.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think cooperatives are really good at just getting people to get used to different ethos, and also to give people experience of starting to manage themselves and figure out how they're going to work together without being told. So I think those really valuable practical skills that people can start to learn. And one sort of thing I've been thinking of that kind of ties into this is about communities starting their own banks to create credit, and basically printing your own money, and that gives you a way of basically creating your own, call it capital, within your community, to get people to start investing in projects, because not everyone has the luxury of having loads of spare time and enough income to work for free, and that kind of divides people into it kind of splits the movement between people who've got that time and people who have to work. So yeah, I think that would be really interesting to explore more. I don't know if people have heard of Bitcoin, which is like a virtual currency.
You don't think what?
I don't know if people have heard of Bitcoin, which is a virtual currency.
Yes.
But I'm really interested in the idea of just issuing currency to pay for social projects, and then try and keep that circulating within the community. And one other project that might be happening, I don't know if people are familiar with the chocolate factory in Greenbank, which has been derelict for about 10 years. The developers are trying to redevelop it again now. We're just forming a community group to try and influence this, and it has been floated, the idea of trying to bid for the site.
Yes.
So yeah, if anyone lives up in Easton, around that way, try and get involved. And I'd be really interested in maybe inviting you along to one of our meetings.
And your local cooperative, have you heard of the cooperative hub?
No.
If you want to establish a community benefit society or a co-op, you can apply to the cooperative hub, it's on the web, for free consultancy advice. And the Bristol Cooperative Development Centre are very, very good. So, for example, your boat ferry service, the nice little boats that went around the docks, the boat taxi. Yeah, it's wonderful. But the people running it stopped running it for whatever reason, and a group of Bristol people bought the boats. Okay, and they're now setting up a community benefit society, so they can all put their shares into it. You can invest a maximum of 20,000, and so your tax, I don't know what it's called, your boat taxi service will be owned by one of these bodies. Isn't that great? Yeah, so it's so I think one at a time these things will happen. So with the chocolate factory, thanks. Get your cooperative hub on board, because, like with the Ford Hall Farm example, you could actually. Can I keep that? Yeah. You can lots of small amounts of money from lots of people can really build the energy. And the developer may be interested in working with you to share the value. I mean, for example, in Stroud, a developer was going to knock down a big mill, an iconic building near the station. And some of us sat on the roof to stop it. And eventually, the developer did a deal, and we saved the building, and we secured some community facilities and flats in the building. Do you see what I mean? So you can wheel and deal. But you do need to get organised.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of energy, and there's some people who went through the process before a few years ago with the last bid. So we're just trying to form a residents' association to give us some standing and sway in any negotiations. But, we're meeting every week or two, so I'd really like to invite you along to meet the whole group.
And what does your new mayor, George Ferguson, what's his attitude to this?
I saw him a few nights ago at another meeting, but I mentioned it to him and he seems enthusiastic-ish.
Yes.
Yeah, he didn't say anything against the idea. So yeah, he might be on side with it.
Tobacco factory, chocolate factory. Yeah. Because I think in Bristol there is an issue. Bristol City Council own 55% of your land, of our land. That's statutory ownership. But historically, there's been a blockage on community groups, civil society getting hold of that land and facilities.
Wow.
Is anybody here connected with a community land trust in Bristol? So, in fact, the Bristol City Council has given land for the Bristol Community Land Trust, which is fantastic. So the door is open with your new mayor. So I think these models are out there. The cooperative enterprise hub is there as support. It's really up to us to get a few working models going. And, I mean, in terms of Bristol, which are the models of good practice in this area? You know, the community ownership of assets that you think really work. What happens there?
It's a completely volunteer-run cinema which holds not only films but many arts events. So lots of gigs and lots of art installation on the walls, sort of constantly, and that rotates. And I'd say there's something like 200 volunteers on the database, but there's probably about, might be between, I'm unsure, between about 30 and 50 people who sort of there, at least once a week, say, a kind of really core team of volunteers. I volunteer there, but I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily like a core member.
Right.
But it's just, the entire thing is programmed, staffed, and just completely run by volunteers. So the whole thing functions perfectly well. Everyone communicates via an emailing list, and it's successful, and it has been successful for, I think it's 15 years.
Fantastic. And who owns what body owns the asset?
Well, this is Ali Novi, really.
Yes, sorry, Ali I'm not sure who owns the building itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we rent it at the moment. I mean, the freehold group was set up because the landlord is selling the building.
Yes.
And in order to maintain the coop, the cinema in that building, we will need to buy it. So at the moment, we've got a freehold campaign to raise the money. It's £185,000. So we're trying to basically own it ourselves.
Right.
I mean, just the public will own it. Whoever wants to become a volunteer will own it. Keep it as a community space.
So this structure I've talked that you can set up a charitable community benefit society. So that might be the structure. You don't pay stamp duty because you're a charitable community benefit society, and people can give and get that can be tax deductible. Okay, so it would be worth checking out that. And 185,000 isn't that much, is it?
Well, I think the standing at the moment is definitely over 40,000. It might be close to 50,000 now. I haven't checked in the last week, but I mean, that's pretty good. So what has it been? 4 months of fundraising, maybe even slightly longer.
Yeah.
So we've got until December, and then possibly a sort of extended period after that, where we've got to raise all of that money, and we've got some projects going on. So please do go to the Cube website and donate if you can.
It's called the Bristol Cube.
It's called Cube Cinema.
Cube Cinema. Yeah.
So you can find, I think it's cubecinema.com.
Yeah.
So you can find the freehold link through there and do donate, because it's a brilliant place. Completely, owned technically by you all.
By us.
By us, exactly.
Yeah. Great. But the bank idea is really important. I mean, in the 19th century, we started, building societies were started. I think the first one was in a Birmingham pub. People wanting to build their houses, clubbing together and saving. So what we need is a Bristol rebuilding society. Okay? Why not get local people investing in a local rebuilding society that can invest into projects like the Cube, okay, that can make loans where people's savings go into. Because Bristol Building Society was taken over by the Irish Bank, wasn't it? Allied Irish Banks. Demutualised. So we need to create the mutual forms of investment. So in Stroud, what we in Stroud Commonwealth, we're a small not-for-profit company that do asset development and co-op development. What we're trying to do is to found Stroud Rebuilding Society for investing into and for making loans. We've tried local money, like the local exchange trading system, successfully. We've got a time bank in terms of fair shares. We've tried Stroud money as well. The Let's work really well, and the fair shares works well. But we think we do need a financial vehicle. And if I was going to be strategic about Bristol and George Ferguson, and your projects and all these other, we definitely need a Bristol rebuilding society. Yeah? Because why should we invest or have our money in small amounts in different banks and building societies, in other parts of the world? Yeah? In other parts of the country. We don't know quite what they do.
Well, the thing is, a lot of it isn't very safe either, is it? In terms of capital in banks, people. It'd be much better if it was placed into somewhere which was more secure.
Yeah. And
utilised for local benefit.
That's right. Yeah. So I think housing is a really good investment. So if you. And so one option is to develop more housing cooperatives, either tenant cooperatives or mutual home ownership. Have you heard of Lilac in Leeds? Lilac? People pay 30% of their income into this mutual home ownership society. They built 25 units, and there are people with quite high incomes, doctors, and people on 16, 17 and 18,000 a year, and they all pay 30% of their income into funding the mortgage. It's just nearly been built, and it's a really interesting model. So we want, in Stroud, we want to develop our own form of Lilac, we tried to develop it on a former hospital site, but the government turned it down. They were the landowner. Now 78 homes have been built on that site by Kevin MacLeod of Grand Designs, and we've got a few affordable homes, 18, into our land trust. But I think cooperative housing is a really good way of investing money and also getting money from people in their 50s, 60s and 70s, to help people in their 20s, 30s and 40s with housing. So that's on our development agenda. Any other openings you see? Yes, you're a cube. Are you a cube man?
Yeah, a bit of both.
Yeah.
You seem to be talking a lot about taking back from the state, or taking back land that's owned by the council or local government. Should we be directing our energies somewhere else? And especially when you talk about housing, for me, that's so out of so many people's reach, the idea of housing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a game that I think I don't want to play along with. I don't want to escalate housing by being involved in. Is it better for us to put our energies elsewhere into the legalities of private property development rather than kind of attacking something we already own and then not being allowed to develop there, a co-op? Or...
It's about partnership. We've got the community, civil society, we've got the statutory sector, the state, and we've got business. And it's about building partnerships. Okay? It's not about taking, it's about hopefully creating new opportunities for mutual benefit. So for example, Bristol City Council may want to build council houses, and if they do build more council houses, those will be subject to the right to buy. So that socially created asset will be lost. Stroud District Council is building council houses, but it's actually losing more council houses to right to buy sales than it's building. So that a civil society co-op housing movement can say to Stroud District Council, we can provide co-op housing which will not be subject to the right to buy. So that's partnership. And social business in the form of a housing association can help deliver that. Do you see what I mean? And we also need to work very constructively with the creative, positive voices in the business sector. There are people like in Triodos Bank in Bristol. There's and the Co-op Bank, various other people, even sometimes main high street bankers who are actually quite keen on what we've been talking about.
Which is
building community assets where the benefits, the community benefits are preserved long term, but also unlock individual initiative. So it's finding the right people. I mean, you have business people in Bristol who are interested in supporting things, for example. Like the chocolate factory, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of a few other projects that are run as cooperatives. It's just essential food trading. I think that's a co-op.
Yeah.
It's Cafe Kino, a co-op. Then a bit different. There's the Cavelli Cafe, which has been going for 15 years, and they bought that about 10 years ago, I think. That's run by volunteers now. There are a few different things going on. I don't know if anyone knows of any other co-ops.
But is Cavelli a really good example of people taking?
I don't know it.
It was squatted for
to start with, yeah.
10 years? Or?
Yeah, and then they raised the funds to buy it very cheaply, from what I've seen. Surprisingly cheaply.
So that's a really good example of people taking what they needed and saying, we want it.
I think the other, this is tell me if this is totally off your map, but we're being stuffed at the moment by energy prices, aren't we? The big six, they're not not many of them are paying taxes in the UK, are they, on their profits? The big 6 energy firms, and they're putting up the prices. I've gone with cooperative energy recently. Anybody signed up to Co-op Energy? Because I trust them for buying gas, and because we own it as members. However, we could reframe the whole. We could move from the market to association. We could say, actually, energy is a system, and how can consumers work with energy distributors and energy producers in an associative way, so that we can create a framework, an associative framework for governing how we meet our energy needs. Okay, it wouldn't be competition as we know it. It would be consumers joining with distributors and producers to really plan what's needed. So consumers may say, well, actually, we need to retrofit our houses. I need 10,000 to retrofit my house. And if we as householders retrofitted our houses, we wouldn't need new nuclear power stations, for example. Okay, so if you set up a framework, a consumer, distributor, producer framework, an associative framework, rather than seeing it as a market where the producers get most of the money, and the gains and benefits are not shared through the chain, then we could have a real transformation. So do you see it's a different form of thinking? Yes, you've got a question. Sorry, I'm going on.
Points I want to come back on.
Yeah.
First of all, simple one. Retrofitting is very expensive, especially for housing stock that we've got, especially in Bristol. I think it's a lot to need to get updated. It's very, very expensive. So to actually get the money to be able to do that is not easy. Going a step further, rather than working in partnership with providers, why not go for community generation, small scale schemes, or even going back to very simple technology like rocket stoves, where you're not actually needing this amazing technology. It's something that's very simple and ways of producing your own food.
I think self-provisioning, that's really good. However, people still need capital to do some of these solutions, if on a small scale. And what I'm suggesting with this associative working is, as consumers, as producers and distributors, we need to totally replan how we do energy, because at the moment it's destroying the planet. We've got fuel poverty, haven't we? A lot of people suffer from fuel poverty. And there's a lot of capital going into unneeded power stations. I know the retrofitting is expensive, but think of the expense of nuclear power stations lifetime.
I totally agree.
So if we could switch that investment to retrofitting or building better houses, yeah. But and in a way, government regulation doesn't work, because if you have government regulation of the energy system, they think of new ways around it, don't they? Now we're told that we're paying high energy prices so that the energy companies can build more capacity. Then we find they're not paying taxes and they're not really investing that much, or at least it's not transparent. So I mean, when we talk about alternatives to capitalism, that finding an associative framework is a systemic way. I mean, you could argue that the nationalised energy industries were a kind of planning framework, but it might be difficult to It might be difficult to go back to that. But we need an associative framework to actually find a new way of doing it, because if consumers felt they had a real voice in the whole system, then the system would balance out, perhaps without heavy government regulation, which isn't working that well. I know we do need that. Does that make? I mean, what do you think of the idea? Yeah.
Do you know be familiar with multi-stakeholder cooperatives?
Yes.
So rather than having one stakeholder group, you'd have multi-stakeholder
Yeah.
within a cooperative. So, for example, with energy, the consumers, the producers, and the distributors could all be part of that cooperative, and effectively would self-regulate, would self-organise.
And another way of doing it, perhaps a simpler way of grouping, is consumers grouping together in one form of cooperative. I know there's different varieties of consumers, like industrial ones and domestic ones, and distributors and producers, and then forming what's called a secondary cooperative to coordinate the whole system. That's another way of doing it. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I'm just not sure whether that sounds more simple than having every participant in any system
Because these three
having
groups,
access to data and being able to influence decision-making processes.
yeah,
As a matter of course, but you can apply a multi-stakeholder cooperative model to any
exactly,
business, any project,
exactly.
any community, any network.
It's either multi-stakeholder or this primary and secondary model. So, yeah.
Got 5 minutes.